The hide puller. Most people picture a slaughterhouse as one job, a man with a knife. But before a single blade touches most of the carcass, one worker has to strip away the toughest layer standing between the animal and the meat, the hide. The hide puller isn't the one doing the killing, and he isn't the one carving the cuts you'd recognize in a supermarket. He's the one who takes a 1,000-pound steer, freshly stunned and hoisted upside down on the rail, and tears its entire skin off in one continuous pull. A job that sounds mechanical until you understand how much of it still comes down to raw human effort and timing. Here's the moment his whole shift revolves around. The carcass swings toward him at head height, still warm, still faintly moving. He has seconds. He grabs the loosened edge of hide already started by the workers ahead of him and clamps it into the jaws of a hydraulic down puller, a machine that yanks the hide down and off the body with enormous force. But the machine is dumb. If the hide comes off too fast or at the wrong angle, it rips fat and meat away with it, or flings splinters of bone and contaminated debris across the line. So he rides the pull with a knife in his free hand, fisting, punching his gloved fist between hide and flesh to separate them cleanly while the machine hauls. The single hardest part isn't strength. It's that he does this at the plant's line speed, which, at a high-volume beef plant, can run around 390 head every hour. One carcass every 9 or 10 seconds for the length of an entire shift, wrists and shoulders absorbing the shock of every pull. Miss the rhythm and the whole chain backs up behind him. Nobody trains for this in a classroom. The hide puller learns on the floor, usually starting on easier stations, and earning his way to the puller over months, building the specific forearm and grip endurance the job demands the only way it can be built, by doing it until his hands stop cramping. Many come to the work as immigrants taking the job locals won't, learning the knife angles from the man beside them because there's no other way to learn them. And the scale is what makes it land. A single large beef plant can process several thousand cattle a day, which means one hide puller's hands pass over more animals in a week than most ranchers raise in a year. An invisible, relentless piece of the machine that turns a living steer into the beef on your plate. The skinner. If the hide puller handles the big hydraulic pull, the skinner handles everything the machine can't reach, and that's where the real knife skill lives. Cattle have hides fused tight around the legs, the head, the belly, the tail, places where a puller would tear the meat to shreds. So while most people imagine skinning as one clean motion, the skinner's actual job is dozens of precise close-quarters cuts on a moving carcass, freeing the hide by hand exactly where it clings hardest. Watch him for 30 seconds, and the difficulty becomes obvious. The carcass arrives. He sets his blade flat against the line where hide meets fat and draws it in short, controlled strokes, never sawing, never stabbing deep, because a cut half a centimeter too far ruins the leather and gouges the meat underneath. He works the flanks, then reaches overhead to free the brisket, then drops to the shanks, his knife hand never stopping. The single hardest thing about it is that he does this thousands of times a shift, with a razor edge, on flesh that's warm and slick, on a carcass that's swinging, and the blade is always pointed toward his own body. Meatpacking has long carried an injury and illness rate roughly twice the average of all private industry, and the skinner's station is exactly why. He sharpens his knife constantly, because a dull blade needs more force, and a forced cut is the one that slips. Lacerations, tendon damage, and the slow grind of repetitive motion injury in the wrist and elbow are not accidents here. They're the baseline cost of the job. The path to the knife is its own kind of endurance test. New workers spend weeks just learning to hold and steel a blade the way a veteran does, and months building the specific hand strength that lets them cut all day without the forearm seizing. There's no certification hanging on a wall, only the quiet authority of someone who's freed 100,000 hides and still has all 10 fingers. That's the awe of it. The skinner turns a violent, chaotic process into something that looks almost effortless, and he does it under a clock that never slows down. One of the few people alive who can strip an animal down to clean carcass by hand, faster than you could describe it. The deboner. The cost of becoming a deboner is written into his hands long before you ever see him work. Ask a veteran on the cut floor to open and close his fist and watch how slowly the fingers move in the morning. Years of gripping a knife in a cold room, making the same cut 10, 12, 15,000 times a shift, leave a permanent mark. This is the job that sits downstream of the kill, on the fabrication floor, where the carcass is broken down into the specific cuts that get boxed and shipped. And unlike the killing stations, the deboner's brutality is quiet and slow. It accumulates. The core of the work is deceptively simple to describe and punishing to do. A section of carcass reaches him, and he has to separate meat from bone cleanly, leaving as little usable meat on the bone as possible because every gram left behind is money lost. So he cuts fast and close, hooking the blade around the joint, feeling for the seam between muscles by touch, working in a room kept cold, often just above freezing, to keep the meat safe, which means his hands are stiff and half numb the entire time. The single hardest aspect is the relentless repetition against resistance, thousands of forceful, twisting knife strokes per shift, each one loading the same tendons in the same way, which is exactly the mechanism behind the carpal tunnel syndrome and chronic shoulder injuries that stalk this station. Workers on lines like this perform thousands of repetitive motions a day, and the damage is often invisible until it's permanent. A shoulder that won't lift, a wrist that won't grip. Nobody arrives able to do this. It takes months to build the seam feel and the hand speed, and longer to survive the toll. Many workers cycle out with injuries before they ever become truly fast. The ones who last learn tricks the body teaches only through pain, how to load the strong parts of the hand, how to let the knife do the work. And here's the scale that hides in plain sight. Nearly every recognizable cut of meat you've ever bought passed through hands exactly like his. The Deboner is anonymous by design, but the entire retail meat case is built on the accuracy and endurance of people doing this one brutal, repetitive thing all day, every day. The Kill Floor Cleaner. Most of the roles on this list work while the line runs. The Kill Floor Cleaner works when everyone else has gone home, and in many ways, his shift is the one nobody else could stomach. When production stops for the night, the kill floor is a scene of blood, fat, bone fragments, and biological debris coating every surface, floor to ceiling. His job is to make it food safe by morning. What makes him different from a normal janitor is that the mess he cleans is a biohazard, and the tools he uses to remove it are almost as dangerous as the environment itself. The heart of his shift is the sanitation wash, and it's grueling in a way that's hard to picture from the outside. He works through the night dragging high-pressure hoses that blast near scalding water. Sanitation cycles run hot, often around 180 degrees Fahrenheit, to kill pathogens, filling the room with thick steam so dense he can barely see the coworker beside him. He layers on caustic and chlorinated chemicals to break down fat and destroy bacteria, and here is the single most dangerous part. He does much of this inside confined, poorly ventilated spaces, drains, tanks, the underside of equipment, where cleaning chemicals mix with the hydrogen sulfide that rises off decomposing blood and organic sludge. That gas has killed sanitation and rendering workers who climbed into a tank thinking it was empty. He also reaches his hands into machinery to scrub it, and if a lockout step is skipped, a machine that switches on is a fatal event. Cleanup crews suffer some of the industry's worst injuries precisely because the guards are off during cleaning. The path here is often the harshest of all, because these overnight sanitation crews are frequently the most vulnerable workers in the building, sometimes contracted, sometimes undocumented, sometimes in cases that made national headlines, discovered to include miners working through the night with hazardous chemicals. There's little training and less recognition. But without him, the plant does not open. Every clean, gleaming production line you'd see on a daytime tour exists, because someone spent the night alone in the steam, turning a blood-soaked floor back into a food facility, the most thankless, brutal shift in the entire building. The Eviscerator. Timing is everything at the Eviscerator station, and the window he works in is measured in seconds. His job is to open the carcass and remove the internal organs, the pluck, and the digestive tract, cleanly and fast, before contamination can spread. It's a role most people never imagine exists as a specialized position, but it sits at the exact pressure point of the entire operation. Get it right, and the meat is safe. Get it wrong, and you can foul an entire carcass, or worse, the ones behind it. Here is the moment, second by second. The opened carcass swings to him. He makes a careful incision down the belly, and the abdominal wall spills open. Now the clock starts. He has to reach in and free the stomach and intestines, a slippery, heavy mass, often weighing more than 100 pounds in cattle, and drop it onto the offal table without nicking the gut. Because if his blade punctures the intestine or the stomach, digestive contents and bacteria like E. coli or salmonella spray across the meat. And that's the nightmare the whole plant is built to prevent. The single hardest aspect is doing this delicate, contamination-critical cut at full line speed, with the organ mass fighting gravity and his own grip, over and over, one carcass every few seconds. His forearms are buried inside a warm body cavity hundreds of times a shift, and the strain of hauling that weight loose while keeping the knife precise is exactly what wrecks backs and shoulders here. Learning the eviscerator's touch takes months on the floor, because the seam where organs release cleanly can't be taught from a book, it's felt. New workers foul carcasses, veterans almost never do, and that reliability is the whole value of the role. And the awe is in the stakes he quietly carries. Every time you've eaten meat and not gotten sick, part of the reason traces back to someone like him, a person hauling 100 pounds of viscera out of a carcass every few seconds without slipping, standing between the food supply and a contamination outbreak all shift long. The rendering plant operator. The path to the rendering room is a path most workers never willingly take. It's the part of the plant people mean when they talk about the job that even slaughterhouse workers don't want. The rendering plant operator handles everything the kill floor discards: the bones, fat, condemned tissue, blood, and inedible remains that can't become food but can't just be thrown away either. His job is to cook it all down into usable products: tallow, and the meat and bone meal that ends up in animal feed, fertilizer, and industrial goods. Nothing is wasted, and he's the reason. His core duty runs on heat, pressure, and stench that has to be experienced to be believed. He feeds raw material into massive cookers and renders it at high temperature. Rendering processes run hot, commonly well above 240 degrees Fahrenheit, to melt fat and drive off moisture, while managing steam pressure, grinders, and pumps that move scalding grease and slurry through the system. The single most dangerous part of his day is the confined space work. The cookers, tanks, and pits generate hydrogen sulfide and can go oxygen deficient, and rendering has a grim history of confined space deaths, often doubled when a second worker climbs in to rescue the first and is overcome by the same gas. He works surrounded by moving machinery capable of catching a sleeve, heat that can scald on contact, and an odor so heavy it soaks into skin and clothing and follows him home. There's no glamour and little recruitment for this. Rendering operators often come up to the plant's hardest, lowest status jobs, and the knowledge of how to run the cookers safely is learned slowly, under a veteran. Because the margin for error with pressurized heat and toxic gas is thin, yet the scale of what he handles is staggering. Rendering quietly processes millions of tons of material a year that would otherwise pile up as biohazardous waste, turning the unusable remains of the entire meat industry into something with value. The invisible last step that keeps the whole system from drowning in its own byproducts. The stun operator. The stun operator holds a position most people would refuse outright, and it separates him from every other role on this list. He is the one who renders the animal unconscious, the human hand at the exact moment a living animal becomes a carcass. Where the other workers deal with the body, he deals with the transition, and he carries the full weight of getting it right every single time, because a failed stun means an animal that suffers. The work itself is fast, physical, and unforgiving of hesitation. As each animal comes up the chute into the knocking box, he positions a captive bolt gun, a device that fires a retractable steel bolt into the brain to cause instant insensibility, against a precise spot on the skull, and fires. The single hardest aspect isn't the mechanics. It's that he has to place a perfect shot on a large, frightened, moving animal, one after another, at the plant's relentless pace. And a mishit means he must restun immediately with zero delay. He's doing this on cattle that can weigh well over 1,000 pounds, in a tight space, absorbing the recoil and the noise and the reality of what each pull of the trigger does, for an entire shift. Federal humane slaughter law requires that animals be rendered insensible to pain before being shackled and cut. And he is the person legally and morally responsible for that line being held. No school prepares anyone for this. The physical technique can be learned in weeks, but the part that takes its toll can't be trained away. The psychological cost of being the one who does the killing, repeatedly, for years. Researchers have documented that slaughterhouse workers, and kill floor workers especially, show elevated rates of depression, anxiety, and a form of trauma tied specifically to being the agent of repeated killing. That's the quiet, uncomfortable awe of the role. Every piece of meat in every store passed through a moment controlled by someone standing in that box, carrying a burden most people will never have to hold even once, and doing it thousands of times a day so that the rest of the chain can look away. The sticker. And then there is the sticker, the hardest daily routine of all 8, the role that sits at the bloody center of everything the slaughterhouse does. Working right behind the stun operator, he is the one who actually ends the animal's life. After the stun, the sticker severs the major artery so the animal bleeds out completely, the step called exsanguination. Everything upstream leads to his knife, and everything downstream depends on him doing it perfectly. There is no more visceral station in the building. The moment defines the whole job. A stunned animal reaches him hanging from the rail, and he has a knife in a matter of seconds. He drives the blade into the base of the throat and cuts the carotid arteries and jugular veins in a single decisive motion, releasing an enormous immediate gush of blood. A large animal holds many gallons, and most of it comes out fast. The single hardest aspect is the unbroken combination of speed, precision, and proximity. He must make a clean, complete cut on every animal within seconds of the stun, so the bleed out is fast and the animal never regains sensibility. And he does it standing directly in the path of the blood, drenched, on a slick floor, gripping a knife in a fist that has to stay accurate no matter how tired it is. He performs this cut hundreds or thousands of times a shift, and the wet floor, the blade, and the exhaustion make his station one of the most injury-prone and psychologically heavy in the entire plant. The toll of getting here and staying here is the steepest of anyone's. There's no training that hardens a person to standing in blood and cutting throats for 8 hours. The workers who do it describe having to go numb to survive it, and the research on kill floor trauma points straight at this kind of work. Many can't do it for long. The ones who can are rare, and they pay for it. That's why he's ranked last, the most brutal daily routine of them all. The sticker is the sharpest edge of a system most people eat from every day and never think about. The single human being at the exact point where a living creature becomes food, holding the line so the rest of us don't have to see it. 8 roles, 1 building, and every one of them a job most people will never see, doing work most people couldn't do for a single shift. From the hide puller's aching grip to the sticker's knife, the slaughterhouse runs on human beings absorbing a physical and psychological toll, so the rest of us can pick up a package of meat without a second thought. It's brutal, it's relentless, and it's astonishingly skilled. And it's happening right now, on a floor somewhere, while you watch this. If videos like this, the real unromanticized look at the jobs that keep the world running, are what you're here for, subscribe so the next one finds you. And drop a comment below. If you've worked one of these roles, tell us what we got right or wrong. And if you couldn't do it, tell us which of the 8 you'd tap out of first.